Hello. Over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be discussing conflict. And my aim here is to give you some tools and some ideas to manage yourself, but also the relationships around you when you find yourselves in conflict situations. Conflict is part of life. Some people seem to attract it a little bit more than others, but nonetheless, for all of us, there are going to be points when we're going to need to cope, manage, and engage well with others under what can be quite stressful conflict situations and conditions. So, I'm going to talk through a tool method which I've certainly found incredibly helpful with that, and I hope that you do as well. So, first of all, why does conflict occur? There are many different reasons, but if you boil it down, there do tend to be sort of underlying sort of triggers or underlying reasons as to why conflict manifests and presents in the day to day. So sometimes it's to do with there being a significant clash between beliefs. So conflict requires an awful lot of energy. It's a stressful thing to be part of. So for most of us, most people don't enjoy conflict. I mean, a few people do, but most of us don't. And so it needs to be significant, and if a point of view or an opinion is put forward that really clashes with your deeply held beliefs, your thoughts about what really matters and what you really stand for, then that is likely to result in conflict, where we stand up for those beliefs and we can find ourselves then in a conflict situation where those significant beliefs clash. Another cause of conflict is when an individual's fundamental needs have not been met. The author Marshall Rosenberg talks about nonviolent communication, and he makes this point that very often, when you look at why somebody is presenting um, anger, frustration, um, irritation about a situation, it's because they have a need that hasn't been met, that hasn't been fulfilled. And I think that that's a really interesting idea. And one question to ask when somebody is um, coming across as being angry or frustrated, and rather than sort of reacting to that in a confrontational way, a good question to ask is, what needs haven't been met here? What are the underlying needs here that this person has that have not been fulfilled? Is there something that we could do in order to meet those needs? And just that thought process, that process of helping rather than reacting with conflict, may well be a good start point here. Later, David Rock looked at what those needs may be and identified these, that there again patterns and themes around these, that the needs that need to be met for people to be happy and well adjusted and engaged in what they're doing. And again, when these needs aren't met, we tend to see a threat, and when we see that threat, sometimes we will react with the kind of the fight response, which will then bring about conflict in the team. So the first need there, status, that's our need to be valued. So if there's something that happens or a decision that's made that makes us feel undervalued, that's likely to result in conflict. Certainty. People need certainty. Not knowing can be extremely stressful and again a cause of frustration and unhappiness. So um, if we're waiting on significant decisions, and or we feel unclear about what the future holds, that is that is something that we perceive as a threat, and that can manifest then in quite negative behaviours. Autonomy. We love autonomy on the whole. Autonomy really matters to us, and so that's why we really hate being micromanaged. And people, particularly people in authority, coming in and taking control of the things that we're doing or the work that we're on. Significant cause of conflict when we feel that our autonomy is being threatened or disrupted in some way. Relatedness. We feel that we need to belong. We have this need to be part of something more than ourselves, and so when that's disrupted, again, perhaps through change, restructures, those sorts of things, that can bring about great levels of unhappiness, a sense of uncertainty, and again, conflict. Fairness. This is another fundamental need that we have, that we feel treated fairly, compared to our peers and our colleagues. And so, again, any sort of treatment or behavior that seems discriminatory or that contradicts this need for fairness, highly likely to result in conflict. So it's a scarf model, very useful again in terms of thinking about, well, what might be the root cause of this conflict? What are the needs that aren't being met? These patterns, these frameworks help us to kind of analyze that situation and maybe start to think a little bit more deeply about what's going on here. What is causing this conflict? So moving then perhaps to solutions a little bit, and and how we think about, again, managing ourselves well. So emotional intelligence is partly about managing ourselves, understanding our own internal processes and being able to manage them effectively, as well as being able to read and interpret what's going on with other people. The parent adult child model, or transactional analysis as it's sometimes known as, goes all the way back to the 1950s, and it has people who love it and people who don't like it so much. But I'm a fan, and I find this, again, a really helpful framework to think about what might be going on in conflict situations. So we all sort of manifest different ego states at different times, and the parent is where we tend to behave in a way that is parental. We're kind of channeling how our parents engaged with us when we were children, if you want to get a little bit Freudian about it. And so the parent might be, I'm very disappointed. Not good enough. You've let us all down. You need to change. This isn't this isn't good enough. Do better. Try harder. Work more. And so that in particular is the critical parent. So the critical parent that comes across with a bit of a poke in the chest. Not good enough. You've let me down. You've let yourself down. Must try harder. Must do better. That the critical parent blames and comes across as being sort of frustrated and really gives the other person a bit of a poke in the chest. And nobody enjoys that, and that makes that impacts probably our sense of fairness in many respects. Well, that's unreasonable. That feels incredibly unfair. Or our sense of status. Hang on a minute. This is devaluing me as a person. And so when we react to that, um, we are likely to react as the child. So the parent tends to provoke the child in the other person, and that child may be petulant. So the petulant child is just where we just like small children do, they stamp their feet, they go red in the face, they cross their arms, the bottom lip goes out. That's the petulant child. So unfair. How dare you talk to me like this? So unreasonable. And so here we find ourselves in the conflict situation. The critical parent leading, bringing out the petulant child in the other person, and we find ourselves in conflict there. Eric Byrne, the author of this model, this being in the drama cycle. And it's weird how once that pattern starts, it can be quite a difficult thing to break out of. And it can work the other way as well, that, if somebody comes to the discussion as the petulant child, so unreasonable, so unfair, I feel so hard done by, I'm such a victim, that can bring about the frustrations in others. And so, that frustrated person then becomes critical parent. And so, reverse, but ultimately the same situation. We find ourselves in conflict. So this is, one aspect to this. There are more dimensions to transactional analysis. There's also, the nurturing parent who wants to protect and shelter others, and there's the adaptive child who wants to avoid any sort of conflict and doesn't really want to sort of engage with the difficult discussions that need to happen here in order to work through them. So both of those eco states can create problems as well. The smothering nurturing parent, or the avoiding um, non-confrontational adaptive child. The situation tends not to get better when we have those ego states at play. Where we really want to be is that place in the middle, the adult. So the adult is self-aware, in the present, and thinking very much like you would hope you would on a good day. What's going on here? What's the best way through this? What is a positive outcome? What do we need to do together to achieve this positive outcome? What are the needs that aren't being met here? Again, that's a very adult question. And if we start to think on that sort of level, it's highly likely that we are being the adult. But again, humans being humans, it's easy to say, it's difficult to do. And a question to think about is, if you think about the last time that you were driving along the motorway, um, and somebody, usually in an Audi, I've found, I'm sure there are lovely Audi drivers out there as well, but an Audi and probably one of those tank-like Audi 4x4s that drive up behind you and the lights are flashing, and they obviously in a real rush to get past. How do you react in that sort of situation? Well, the parent would probably feel extremely put out and want that person to be punished and say, "Well, I hope you set off a camera. I hope the police pull that person over. Well, that's just jolly well dangerous. They should be taken off the road." Critical parent, and we might well, sort of again, sort of block them a bit, and and give them a good shake of the fist as they go by. The petulant child might say, "Well, hang on a minute. This is completely unreasonable, and I'm driving here." And you might do quite sort of even potentially quite dangerous things. Well, I'm not tolerating this, and we actually block them and get them in the way. Get in the way. The big Audi 4x4 behind us gets even more. The driver gets red faced and frustrated, and those sorts of things can actually ultimately lead to road rage situations and all of that sort of stuff. And again, we can find ourselves in a really sort of destructive place where we start to play games and perhaps even put ourselves into a dangerous situation. What would the adult do, I wonder, in that situation? And again, you may have your own thoughts on that. I mean, I think, here it's a matter of like, well, I'm not here to judge this person. Who knows why they're driving so aggressively? Perhaps they are under an awful lot of stress. Perhaps they've got something important that they have to do. And so the adult might well move out of their way and say, well, that's their risk. I hope they get to their destination safely, and I hope that everything's okay. This is me. I'm not going to take any risks. I don't want to be part of this. And for me, all I can control here is to make sure that I drive safely and don't create any risk for myself or the people around us. I hope they get to their destination okay, but ultimately that is their risk and their responsibility. I guess that might be an adult narrative. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, where am I? What happened? What did I do last time that happened? I hope that you were the adult. I'd love to say that I'm always the adult in that situation. I mean, I teach this stuff, and I know I'm definitely not. Anyway, it's a useful framework in terms of thinking, where are we? What's going on in terms of the dynamics here? But importantly, where am I? In what ego state am I in at the moment? Parent and child tend to be very reactive. So if we're reacting to events around us, it's likely that we are in a parent child sort of drama state of mind. The adult doesn't react. The adult takes a pause, seeks to understand what's going on in the context, and then responds a little bit more strategically. What's the outcome that we need to achieve here? What's the best way for us to get to that? Adult tends to be where we do our best work. So thinking about constructive conflict, if we're avoiding conflict, well, then we're going back to being that adaptive child, and that's not a great place to be because things tend to get worse. If the issue isn't addressed, it tends to grow, it manifests, and things tend to get worse rather than better. So constructive conflict is generally better than artificial harmony. It's really important to demonstrate empathy. So again, thinking about the aggressive driver in his Audi 4x4, who knows what's going on in that person's world? What's happened in their day to get them to that point where they feel the need to drive so aggressively and to be flashing their lights? It's not necessarily we judge people from their behavior, but not from their intentions. Because we don't know that. And then conversely, of course, we judge ourselves by our intentions rather than our behavior. So it's hard to say really what's going on in other people's worlds. And so sometimes I think we need to give them the benefit of the doubt and think, well, actually, what needs aren't being met here? What might be going on in that person's world that has led them to behave this way? And then straight away, we're starting to take a more adult script or narrative to this. But equally, we don't want to be a pushover. You've got to negotiate strongly for your own position. Otherwise, we ourselves we can become the adaptive child, or we can become a bit of a victim in this situation. that ultimately it's all well and good, but what we don't want to do is put our is to um, weaken our own position because of the force of other people's will. So yes, yes, we need to demonstrate empathy, but that needs to be balanced against strongly negotiating for our own position and our own needs, and not being the victim in the relationship. We should strive to maintain the adult relationship as far as possible when conflict needs to be had. And I think perhaps that's the difference between a constructive conflict and destructive conflict, is that by and large, if we're in a constructive conflict, even though things might get a bit heated, we might be having the debate, fundamentally, we're coming at it with positive intent, with good outcomes in mind. We come to conflict in good faith. And if we're doing that, it's likely that even though it won't necessarily be comfortable or easy, if we're aiming for the same place, it's likely that we'll get there. It isn't always possible. And again, sometimes that can be down to chemistry or personality clashes or really deep disagreements in terms of our values and beliefs. Sometimes it's necessary to have an objective mediator in the discussion, to be that adult in the room, to bring people back to that adult way of thinking, and to try and hold that space as productively and constructively as well. So sometimes an objective third person needs to be involved in the discussion. So just a few thoughts there really on what's an interesting and complex topic. I hope that there are some ideas which are helpful. And again, whether you're on the motorway or in the boardroom, just thinking about that adult ego state, logical, rational, outcome focused. What is the best possible outcome that we need to achieve here? How do we work together well in order to achieve that? What are the needs that aren't being met here? And how could we help to meet those needs as well as possible? So some top tips, I suppose, really, in terms of managing conflict well, supported by a bit of theory. I hope that that's been helpful, and thank you very much for taking the time to watch this short video.